making a change in policy in Cuba or toward Cuba just falls into the too hard category politically most of the time. There are very few opportunities that we have had over the years to make real progress in that area. One of them might have occurred while I was there, but it didn't. After all, we had an election here in the United States. We had a new administration come in, which at least had some people in it that were sympathetic to the idea of making a more, or opening the relationship up a little bit. But in the end, or not in the end, and even in the beginning, during the campaign, I think the people who wanted the president elected made the choice that they would make the statements, do the necessary things to commit themselves to a continuation of the old policy, and that's what happened. Inertia is an important thing in foreign policy and in diplomacy, and inertia took hold. For the 3 years I was there, not much happened. Cuba itself struggled and did survive. By the time I left, they were just beginning to pull out of the tailspin. But it was a different country. When I arrived, I remember distinctly, it looked very poor, it looked shabby, and it was. But 3 years later, it was much worse. There were perhaps, statistics are always difficult, but there were perhaps 50,000 bicycles in Cuba when I arrived. By the time I left, there were somewhere in the range of 800,000 bicycles, these heavy iron flying pigeons made in China. And there were no fat people left in Cuba, literally, or animals, as Vicki said. It was a very difficult time for the Cuban people. And we, of course, sat and watched. There were people who thought that the end was near. When I stopped in Miami on my way to Havana in 1990, there were bumper stickers on the cars that said Christmas in Havana. And there were actually people that believed it. And most of us was wishful thinking, but certainly the country was in crisis. But what most people seemed to forget was that this was a country that was under the control of a very rigid, bureaucratic Ministry of the Interior and Army. They controlled all of the communications, they controlled all of the weapons, and there was no desire on the part of Fidel Castro to permit anything to open up that might allow the people to begin to rise up and challenge his leadership. Sure, there were dissidents, a handful of dissidents, but as Jay said, they were allowed to live, they were allowed to meet with us, and we met with them regularly, but they were also from time to time arrested and taken in and put in prison, sometimes for short sentences, sometimes for long sentences, but they were certainly under control. I'd like to leave some time for questions because I know there are some questions, and so I'll just turn this over to Vicki now, but it was a sad time to be there. We missed some opportunities, but I'm not sure they were real. By that time, Fidel Castro needed us more as the enemy than he needed us as a friend. And I don't think that he would have been prepared to reciprocate in any solid way to anything that we did. We could have, the one thing we could have done then and we can do now is take steps that are in our interest alone and begin to open up. But they have to be in our interest, and they have to be justified purely on U.S. national interests, because I don't think we can expect reciprocity, especially in the current situation in Havana.